In the latest Chasing the Sun episode, the Springboks revealed their dark arts, but also showed a side of them we don't often see, the passion and the emotional side of a Springbok player at the highest level. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you my review of episode 4, my opinion on some of the decisions that were made. I would also love to hear what you thought of episode 4 down in the comments. Also, if you haven't, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. About 94% of you that watch this channel on a regular basis are not subscribed. By you subscribing, it just helps us make these videos even better. Let's get in to this video. So episode 4 starts with the second half of the French game. Eben Etzebeth is on the bench because he's been sin-binned, got a yellow card at the end of the first half, and he's itching to get back on the field. And you hear them speak about the Springboks needing a spark against France, and that they knew when Eben came back on the pitch that something was going to happen. Well, Eben comes on, and then the Springboks get a penalty on the 5-meter line, and they decide that they're going to go for a quick tap and go. They do a bit of a trick play, and Eben Etzebeth eventually gets over, scoring that try for the Springboks, and they end up going on to beat France. But before that happens, we see the first sort of emotional side from Bongi Mbonambe, where the Springboks then get a late penalty on the halfway line, and Bongi says to Handré Pollard, "This is for South Africa." Pollard eventually puts that over with still 10 minutes to play. They still have to defend against France. France eventually gets another penalty, and it ends with South Africa winning by 1 point. Now, not much happened in the second half. I do think a lot more happened in the first half in that game, but we got our first glimpse into the emotions behind Bongi Mbonambe and the Springbok team as a whole. We also got to see how ice cold Handré Pollard is. We know this about him. We know he's kicked 12 kicks for 12 kicks in the 2023 World Cup, but to see it replayed in this type of fashion just shows how much BMT that man has. And you can also see the emotion and relief on the entire team's faces when that final whistle goes. They've just beaten France in a quarterfinal of a World Cup, and it seemed like they gave absolutely everything in that game to be able to beat that French side in the quarterfinal. But as they said, it was on to the next. They had England coming up in the semi-final, and the prep for England started immediately. And there was a big emphasis on the scrum of the Springboks in this episode, and as Ox says, the dark arts. I do think sometimes as spectators we forget about how physical a scrum is and how physical rugby is as a whole, but this episode really dove deep into how physical that scrum is, but also dove deep into the emotion behind the players. So you kind of got to see their raw emotion and raw strength at the same time, which is I think what made this episode so good. They also took a deep dive into Ox and Bongi. Ox, Rassie famously said in this episode he's built like a bar fridge, but they go into a bit of his background that is brought up in Bloemfontein on the farms, and it seems like most of that forward pack that's in the front row was brought up on a farm, which is why they're so hard, which is why they're so strong, which is why that scrum of the Springboks is such a weapon. So we knew that the scrum was going to be a massive deal against England. They had built it up in this episode. Maybe we didn't know at the time in the semi-final all those months ago, we didn't know how influential that scrum was going to be, but I do think the Springboks knew that that scrum was going to come down to them either going through to the final or not. What did surprise me was when Jacques Nienaber said that their plan was to play an expansive game against England. Now obviously that didn't happen because of the conditions, but it is a good thing that they put so much emphasis and focus on the scrum. Also, for this game, it was only the second time in Rassie and Jacques Nienaber's coaching career at the Springboks together that they named the same unchanged 23, and you kind of heard the thinking and thought process behind that. They've just beaten France in France, pulled off an absolute miracle. Let's back them to go get it done against the English. And then we sort of start diving in to this game against England, how England were basically written off by the press, by their own fans, by I think even us Springbok fans, because England hadn't been in great form coming into the World Cup. They've only won 1 out of 6 games leading into the World Cup. They just got beaten by Fiji at home. They'd lost to Wales a couple of times, and they just didn't look like the England team that we faced in 2019 in the final. But England are always a dangerous side. They found some form in the group stage, and the Springboks quickly saw that they were playing a similar style of rugby to the Springboks back in 2019. Now, back in 2019, the Springboks weren't favorites to win the World Cup. They had to bring something different, something that was going to work, that was going to grind out the results, and that's exactly what England did. They weren't looking to be physical, even though they were, but they were looking to turn the Springboks around, kick behind them, make the big forward packs move up and down the field, and try and fatigue the Springboks a little bit. And as we saw, it worked. It worked for about 60 to 70 minutes in that game. England coming in as underdogs. Owen Farrell, as much as I dislike the guy, he is an absolute big match player, and when you underestimate him, that's when he wants to prove you wrong. And I feel like that's the energy that England brought to that game. And then the game starts, and England are immediately start like a house on fire. We also know that from what Jacques Nienaber said, they wanted to play an expansive game. It was bucketing down with rain, and I think as soon as that happened, England knew that they had more of a chance in this game than if it wasn't raining, because England playing the rain more often, they're more used to the conditions. They were the underdogs, and they actually had absolutely nothing to lose. Everyone had written them off. Everyone thought the Springboks were going to make it easily through to the final, but England adapted well to the conditions, a lot better than what the Springboks did. They kept turning the Springboks around. The Springboks kept making mistake after mistake, skew lineouts, knock-ons, offside, penalties away. And you don't often see the Springboks getting dominated physically. But that England pack absolutely dominated them. And like Eben said, it felt like the Springboks were just spiraling for the first 30 minutes of that game. Now something had to change. Yes, Marnie Leborg didn't have a great 30 minutes, but you can't blame it all on Marnie. And I do think it was a ballsy decision from the coaching staff to bring Handré Pollard on in the 32nd minute. I'm glad they did, but I do think Handré Pollard probably should have started that game because he plays for the Leicester Tigers in England. He plays in these rainy conditions more often. He's got a couple of teammates on the English side, so he was automatically a little bit more adapted to this situation. He's also taken part in 2 World Cups. He's won a World Cup. So he's got experience that's far greater than Marnie Leborg's. And I do think it was a little bit unfair of how that situation went down. But ultimately, Pollard came on in the 32nd minute, and the momentum still didn't really change for that first half. The Springboks going into halftime 12-6 down, and you could see as they walked into the change room that the vibe was low. No one was speaking, no one had anything to say. Rassie shut them out for a little bit, but then you kind of just see them sit down. They deflated, no one saying anything, and then the most unlikely of people to say something, Peter Steff, probably says some of the most powerful words that has ever been said in a Springbok change room that really got the boys together, got them ready to take on that second half. They went out for that second half, and it still wasn't going to plan. Farrell then kicks a drop goal. It's 15-6 down, and now we're in the 69th minute. It's 15-6 down. Rassie and the coaches have made all their substitutes. Ox is on, Fuff is on, Deon Fourie, Quacker Smith, and then the emphasis that's been placed on the scrum the entire episode comes to light. Ox comes on and absolutely dominates that English scrum, winning the Boks 3 penalties. Handré Pollard puts the ball in the corner on the 5 meter, a great kick from about 50 meters away, and RG Snyman eventually gets over for the try in the 69th minute. Pollard converts, making it 15-13, and then once again they get a knock-on on the halfway line. It's a scrum again. Ox again scrums that English pack backwards, and he wins South Africa the penalty. Pollard has an opportunity in the 78th minute to take the Springboks into the lead for the first time in the game, and obviously he does because he's got all the BMT in the world. He's got the ice in the veins. The Springboks close it out, win it 16-15, and then we see Bongi and we see all the Springboks, their passion, but specifically Bongi, we see him break down in the change room afterwards. And I think that moment just encapsulates what the Springboks are, what they're trying to do, how much pressure they feel from South Africa and how much passion they have for the badge. It was very interesting how they took a very physical, dominant Springbok side who was focused heavily on the scrums and turned the entire episode into emotion, and showed that emotion from Bongi, from the other players, how these are the toughest, baddest guys on the planet, but at the end of the day they are still humans. They still feel that pressure. They still care as much as the next person. And I just think it was probably one of the most beautiful episodes of Chasing the Sun from season 1 or 2, and it was just so good to see how power, and emotion can mix, and how they portrayed that. And that's why the Springboks are so good, because they're not rigid. They don't operate in one lane. They're diverse, just like South Africa, and they wear that badge and that shirt with pride. Just an absolutely beautiful episode. Again, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I can't wait for episode 5, the final against the All Blacks. But if you guys haven't, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Peace.